August 15th, 1973. Burbank Studios, Stage 7. Bruce Lee threw the hardest punch of his life directly into Sylvester Stallone's solar plexus. No pads, no protection, just bone-meeting flesh with the force of a sledgehammer. The cameras kept rolling. Stallone dropped like a stone, blood trickling from his mouth. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Then Stallone looked up at the frozen crew, wiped the blood away, and whispered 6 words that made 40 grown men step backward in fear. What he said that day never made it into any official report. The footage disappeared. The crew signed NDAs that lasted 50 years, and 2 people who witnessed it died under mysterious circumstances within 6 months. For half a century, Hollywood's most dangerous secret stayed buried, until a basement archivist named Frank Torino found the one copy they missed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vincent "Sly" Torino pressed his back against the cold brick wall of the alley behind Mel's diner, his weathered hands trembling as he fumbled for his phone. The black sedan had been following him for 3 blocks now, and the 2 men in suits weren't tourists looking for the Hollywood sign. Blood dripped from his split lip onto his faded Ramones t-shirt, a reminder that at 58, his reflexes weren't what they used to be when the first man cornered him outside his apartment building. He'd managed to knee the bastard in the groin and run, but now his lungs burned like fire, and his arthritic knees screamed in protest. The documentary crew had found him yesterday. Just kids with fancy cameras and naive dreams about uncovering Hollywood's buried secrets. They'd promised anonymity, protection, justice for Bruce. They'd sworn the story would finally see daylight after 5 decades of silence. What they hadn't told him was that some secrets had teeth. Vincent's phone buzzed. Unknown number. His thumb hovered over the decline button, but something made him answer. "Mr. Torino." The voice was calm, professionally neutral. "You spoke to some people yesterday, people who shouldn't have found you. I don't know what—" "He knows he's dying, Bruce." The voice cut through his lie like a blade. "He knows he's dying, Bruce." Those were your 6 words, weren't they? Vincent's blood turned to ice water. Nobody knew those words. Nobody alive, anyway. The crew members from that day had either died or disappeared over the years. Convenient accidents, heart attacks, suicides, car crashes. One by one, until only Vincent remained, living under an assumed name in a North Hollywood rat trap, collecting disability checks and trying to forget. "You have something that belongs to us," the voice continued. "Something you've kept hidden for 50 years. The real." Vincent's voice cracked. "You want the real. Stage 7, Camera 3. The only surviving footage from that day. We know you have it." Vincent touched the small safety deposit box key hanging around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. He'd stolen the film canister that night, after they'd announced Bruce's death, after the studio executives had swept in like vultures to sanitize the scene. He'd known even then that something was wrong. Bruce's collapse hadn't been natural. The way his eyes had rolled back, the foam at his mouth, the violent convulsions. It wasn't a brain aneurysm. It was poison, and Vincent had caught it all on film. "The documentary crew," Vincent whispered. "What did you do to them?" Silence stretched across the line before the voice returned, colder now. "They had an unfortunate accident. Gas leak in their hotel room. Very tragic. 3 kids. Dead because of him. Because he'd finally grown a conscience after 50 years of cowardice. Here's what's going to happen," the voice said. "You're going to walk to the parking garage on Vine Street. 3rd level, southeast corner. You're going to bring the key to wherever you've hidden our property. And then this all ends quietly. And if I don't, then we do this the hard way. And trust me, Mr. Torino, you don't want to know what the hard way looks like. We've had 50 years to perfect it." Vincent closed his eyes, remembering that terrible day in Hong Kong. The way Bruce had looked at him after taking the punch, the desperation in the martial arts legend's eyes as he'd whispered back, "They poisoned me. The water bottle. Don't let them," before collapsing into convulsions. The studio executives had been there within minutes, too fast, like they'd been waiting. The paramedics who'd arrived weren't paramedics at all. Vincent had recognized one of them from the studio lot, a security guard named Morrison who died in a car accident 6 months later. They'd killed Bruce Lee, made it look natural, covered it up with medical reports and bribes and convenient deaths, and Vincent had run, stolen the footage, and spent 50 years looking over his shoulder. Now the shoulder looking was over. 1 hour, the voice said. Come alone. And Mr. Torino, if you're thinking about running again, remember, we found you once. We can find you anywhere. The line went dead. Vincent slumped against the brick wall, feeling every one of his 58 years pressing down on his shoulders. The alley spun around him as the weight of 5 decades crashed over him like a wave. Bruce Lee, the most famous martial artist in history, had been murdered, and Vincent was the only witness left alive. He thought about those kids, the documentary crew who died for trying to tell the truth, about Bruce, who trusted him with his final words, about all the other witnesses who'd met convenient ends over the years. Maybe it was time to stop running. Vincent pushed himself off the wall and started walking toward Vine Street, the safety deposit box key burning against his chest like a brand. In 1 hour, this would all be over, one way or another. What happens when Vincent reaches the parking garage? Will he hand over the evidence that could expose Hollywood's darkest secret, and what really happened in Bruce Lee's final moments that the studio was willing to kill for? The truth about Stage 7 is finally coming to light, and some people will do anything to keep it buried. Don't miss tomorrow's chapter where the deadly game of cat and mouse reaches its explosive conclusion. Vincent's footsteps echoed against the grimy sidewalk as he walked toward Vine Street, each step carrying him deeper into a nightmare he'd spent 50 years trying to escape. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the Hollywood buildings, and every shadow seemed to hide another threat. His split lip had stopped bleeding, but the metallic taste lingered in his mouth like a promise of worse to come. He wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not when there was still someone who needed him. Vincent pulled out his phone with shaking fingers and dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a warm voice answered. "Hey, Uncle Vinny?" The tension in his shoulders eased slightly at the sound of Maria's voice. Not his real niece. His only brother had died childless 20 years ago, but the closest thing to family he had left. Maria Rodriguez, 32, single mother of twin boys, working double shifts at Cedars-Sinai to make ends meet. She'd been his downstairs neighbor for 3 years, and somehow this fierce, stubborn woman had adopted him into her life despite his protests. "Maria, honey." Vincent's voice cracked. "How are the boys?" "They're good. Diego lost another tooth today and Miguel won a spelling bee. They've been asking when you're coming to dinner again. I told them maybe Sunday if Uncle Vinny feels up to it." Vincent closed his eyes, remembering last Sunday's dinner, the boys chattering in English and Spanish, their gap-toothed grins as they showed him their drawings, Maria's homemade tamales, the first real meal he'd had in weeks, the way she'd quietly refilled his coffee cup and pretended not to notice when his arthritic hands struggled with the wrapper on his medication. "Listen, Maria, I need you to do something for me. What's wrong? You sound different." Vincent paused outside a pawn shop, its neon sign flickering weakly against the gathering dusk. In the reflection of the grimy window, he looked like what he was, a broken-down old man who'd spent 5 decades running from ghosts. His gray hair hung in greasy strands around his weathered face, and his clothes hung loose on his diminished frame. When had he gotten so old? When had he become so invisible? "I want you to take the boys somewhere tonight. Maybe visit your sister in Pasadena. Make it a sleepover." "Vincent, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Just, please, pack some bags. Leave in the next hour. Don't tell anyone where you're going." Silence stretched across the line. Maria was smart, too smart. She'd noticed the men watching their building yesterday, the way Vincent had suddenly stopped taking his evening walks, the hollow look in his eyes that reminded her of wounded animals. "This is about those kids who came to see you, isn't it? The ones with the cameras." Vincent's chest tightened. Maria had been coming home from her morning shift when the documentary crew arrived at his door. She'd smiled and waved at the young filmmaker, Rebecca, with her earnest eyes and naive faith in justice, and made small talk about the weather while Vincent reluctantly let them into his apartment. Now Rebecca was dead, along with her cameraman and sound engineer. 3 bright kids who'd believed truth mattered more than power. "They had an accident," Vincent whispered. "A gas leak. Jesus Christ." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "And you think—" "I think you need to take Diego and Miguel somewhere safe. Tonight. Please." Vincent could hear her breathing, weighing his words against her nurse's practical mind and her mother's fierce instincts. She'd grown up in East LA, knew how the world really worked, understood that sometimes good people disappeared for asking the wrong questions. "How bad is this, Vincent?" "Bad enough that I'm about to do something stupid. Then don't do it." Vincent smiled despite everything. 3 years ago, Maria had found him collapsed on the stairs after a particularly brutal panic attack, his mind lost in memories of Bruce's final moments. She'd helped him to his apartment, made him tea, and sat with him until the shaking stopped. She'd never asked questions about his nightmares or why he flinched at sudden movements. She'd simply decided he was worth protecting. Now he had to protect her. "I have to. It's something I should have done 50 years ago. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. Come home. We'll call the police or—" "The police can't help with this one, honey." Vincent touched the key around his neck, feeling its weight like an anchor. "Just take the boys and go. Promise me." Another long silence. When Maria spoke again, her voice was steady with the kind of resolve that had carried her through nursing school and single motherhood and a dozen other battles. "I promise. But Vincent, whatever you're planning, come back to us. Those boys love their Uncle Vinny. And so do I." The line went dead. Vincent stood alone on the darkening street, surrounded by the ghosts of Hollywood dreams and the weight of 50 years of silence. Time to stop running. Vincent slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket and continued toward Vine Street, each step heavier than the last. The weight of Maria's words, "Come back to us," pressed against his chest alongside the safety deposit box key. For 3 years, those twin boys had called him Uncle Vinny, had drawn him crayon pictures of superheroes and asked him to help with homework. For 3 years, Maria had pretended not to notice when he paid for groceries or slipped $20 bills into her purse when she wasn't looking. He'd finally found something worth living for, just in time to die. The parking garage loomed ahead, its concrete mouth yawning open like a tomb. Vincent paused at the entrance, watching cars disappear into its shadowy depths. 3rd level, southeast corner, 1 hour. The voice on the phone had been so calm, so certain. 50 years of practice, probably. 50 years of cleaning up loose ends and burying inconvenient truths. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Change of plans. Check your apartment first. You'll want to see this. Vincent's blood went cold. His apartment. Maria's apartment was directly below his. The boys would be packing right now, throwing clothes and toys into backpacks, while Maria tried to explain why they needed to visit Aunt Carmen tonight. Would they understand? Would they think Uncle Vinny had abandoned them? His arthritic knees protested as he broke into a shambling run back toward North Hollywood. The sun had fully set now, and the streetlights cast everything in harsh orange shadows. He caught a bus on Highland, sitting in the back row with his baseball cap pulled low, watching every passenger who boarded. An elderly woman with a cane, a teenager with headphones, a man in a business suit who kept checking his phone. Vincent studied the businessman's reflection in the window. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, the kind of unremarkable face that could disappear in any crowd. When the man got off at Vincent's stop, the old stuntman's hands began to shake. The apartment building looked normal from the outside. No black sedans, no men in suits lurking in doorways. But something felt wrong. The usual sounds were missing. Mrs. Chen's television, the Rodriguez twins arguing in Spanish, the thump of bass from the college kid upstairs. The building felt hollow, emptied out like a movie set after the crew went home. Vincent climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, his keys ready. The hallway was dark. The automatic lights must be broken again. He fumbled for his door lock in the shadows, and that's when he smelled it. Cigarette smoke. The expensive kind, not the cheap brands his neighbors smoked. European tobacco with a hint of vanilla. Vincent's apartment door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open with trembling fingers, and warm light spilled out into the hallway. A man sat in Vincent's reading chair, the threadbare recliner where he spent most evenings, nursing whiskey and trying to forget. The stranger was older than the voice on the phone had suggested, maybe 70, with silver hair and the kind of tailored suit that cost more than Vincent's annual rent. His face was lined but sharp, the features of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mr. Torino. Thank you for coming. On the coffee table beside the man lay a manila envelope, thick with photographs. Vincent could see the edge of one image, black and white, grainy, but unmistakably from that day on Stage 7. Bruce Lee mid-collapse, his face contorted in agony. The crew frozen in horror, and in the background, barely visible, Vincent's own younger face behind the camera. Sit down, the man said, gesturing to the couch with a manicured hand. We have much to discuss. Where's Maria? Where are the boys? The man smiled, and it was worse than any threat. Safe, for now. Miss Rodriguez is quite devoted to you, isn't she? Lovely woman. And those children, Diego and Miguel, age 7, such bright boys. Did you know Diego wants to be a stuntman when he grows up, just like his uncle Vinny? Vincent's vision blurred with rage. You son of a bitch. They have nothing to do with this. They have everything to do with this. You made them part of it the moment you chose to care about them. The man leaned forward, his pale eyes reflecting the lamplight. Do you know who I am, Mr. Torino? Vincent stared at the lined face, searching for recognition. Something familiar in the bone structure, the set of the jaw. And then it hit him like a physical blow. Morrison, he whispered. You're Morrison's son. Very good. Richard Morrison, Jr. My father worked studio security in 1975. You remember him, I'm sure. He was one of the paramedics who responded to Mr. Lee's medical emergency. The room tilted around Vincent Morrison, the man who'd helped cover up Bruce's murder, who'd died 6 months later in that convenient car accident. Except he hadn't died. He'd simply disappeared, started a new life, raised a son who'd inherited the family business of keeping Hollywood's darkest secrets buried. 50 years, Morrison continued, opening the envelope and spreading photographs across the coffee table like tarot cards. 50 years my family has protected certain interests. And now you threaten to undo all that work for what? A documentary? Justice? He laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. Justice is a luxury for people who can afford it, Mr. Torino, and you are very, very poor. Vincent stared down at the photographs, dozens of them, chronicling Bruce Lee's final moments from every angle. The terror in the martial artist's eyes, the foam at his mouth, the studio executives watching from the shadows, their faces cold as marble. And there, in the final photograph, Vincent saw something that made his heart stop. In the background, barely visible behind the chaos, stood a younger version of the man now sitting in his chair. Richard Morrison Sr., holding a small vial, his face twisted in something that might have been regret. My father never wanted to be a killer, Morrison Jr. said quietly. But sometimes good men do terrible things for the right price, and sometimes their sons inherit the consequences. Vincent looked up from the photographs, understanding finally flooding through him like ice water. You're not here for the film reel, he whispered. Morrison smiled again, and Vincent realized with crystalline clarity that his old life, his quiet existence of whiskey and solitude and Sunday dinners with Maria's family, was over forever. Oh, but I am, among other things. Vincent's mind raced as he stared at Morrison Jr., the photographs scattered between them like evidence at a crime scene. The apartment felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with 50 years of buried secrets. He needed time to think, to find a way out that didn't end with Maria and the boys in shallow graves. I don't know what you're talking about, Vincent said, forcing his voice steady. Bruce Lee died of natural causes, brain aneurysm. I was just a stuntman who happened to be there. Morrison's laugh was soft, almost paternal. Please, Mr. Torino, we're both too old for games. He picked up one of the photographs, the one showing Vincent behind the camera, his young face frozen in shock. You filmed everything that day, every moment, including the parts that never made it into any official report. Vincent's throat went dry. The film reel, hidden for 50 years in a safety deposit box downtown, along with Bruce's water bottle and a signed statement Vincent had never been brave enough to deliver. Insurance policies that had kept him alive but never truly safe. Even if I had something, Vincent said carefully, what makes you think I'd give it to you? Those kids are dead because of what your family did. Rebecca Martinez, 26 years old. She had a little sister starting college next month. Yes, unfortunate. Morrison's tone didn't change, but necessary, just as this conversation is necessary. He leaned back in Vincent's chair, perfectly at ease. Tell me, what did Bruce whisper to you after you hit him? Those 6 words that made the entire crew freeze? Vincent's blood turned to ice. Nobody knew about that. Nobody except, "You were there," Vincent breathed. "On set that day. You were just a kid, but you were there." Morrison nodded slowly. 15 years old. My father thought it would be educational, watching him work. He was wrong about many things, but he was right about one. I learned exactly what this business requires. The memory crashed over Vincent like a wave. After Bruce had taken the punch, after he'd collapsed, there had been a moment of terrible clarity. Bruce's eyes had found Vincent's across the chaos, and he'd mouthed 6 words that would haunt Vincent forever. The water. They know, save yourself. Not a confession about dying, a warning. "He tried to warn me," Vincent whispered. "Even as he was dying, he tried to warn me. And you've spent 50 years wondering if you should have listened." Morrison stood, smoothing his expensive suit. "My father always regretted not cleaning up that loose end immediately. But you were nobody then. A third-rate stuntman with no connections, no credibility. Who would believe you?" Vincent's hands clenched into fists. "So why now? Why not just let me drink myself to death in peace? Because documentary crews have cameras. Because the internet makes everyone a potential investigator. Because you're not nobody anymore, Mr. Torino. You're a living piece of evidence that very powerful people would prefer to see buried." The apartment felt like a trap now, the walls closing in. Vincent glanced toward the window, calculating distances, escape routes. His knees were shot and his reflexes decades past their prime, but desperation could make old men do extraordinary things. "Don't," Morrison said quietly, following his gaze. "I have associates positioned throughout the building. More watching Miss Rodriguez and her children. More at every exit between here and the parking garage where you were supposed to meet us." He smiled that terrible, patient smile. "We've had 50 years to perfect this, remember?" Vincent slumped back against the couch, the fight draining out of him. Through the thin walls he could hear the building settling around them, creaks and sighs that usually comforted him, but now sounded like a coffin being nailed shut. "What do you want?" "The film reel, Bruce's water bottle, any other evidence you've been hoarding. And then," Morrison paused, considering, "then you're going to help us with one final piece of business." "What business?" Morrison pulled a folded newspaper from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. The headline made Vincent's vision blur. "Legendary stuntman Vincent Torino found dead in apparent suicide." "Tomorrow's edition," Morrison explained. "Already typeset, ready to print." The story writes itself. A washed-up stuntman, haunted by guilt over Bruce Lee's death, finally couldn't live with the shame. Very tragic, very believable. Vincent stared at his own obituary, the words swimming before his eyes. Somewhere in this building, Maria and the boys were probably packing their bags, trusting that Uncle Vinny would somehow make everything okay. They had no idea that their protector was about to become their liability. "There's just one small problem," Morrison continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We need it to look authentic. And for that, Mr. Torino, we need your cooperation." The old stuntman closed his eyes, feeling the weight of half a century pressing down on his shoulders. Outside, Hollywood glittered with its usual false promises, dreams wrapped in neon and buried in concrete. Inside, 2 old men sat surrounded by photographs of murder, planning another death to hide an ancient crime. Vincent opened his eyes and met Morrison's gaze. "No." The word hung in the air between them like smoke from Morrison's expensive cigarette. Vincent watched the older man's face shift, the polite mask slipping to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "No?" Morrison repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. "Mr. Torino, I don't think you understand your situation." "I understand it perfectly." Vincent's voice was steadier than he felt. "You want me to kill myself to protect a 50-year-old cover-up." "I'm saying no." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then reached into his jacket. Vincent tensed, expecting a weapon, but instead the man produced a cell phone. He scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward Vincent. The image made Vincent's stomach lurch. Maria, bound to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, her eyes wide with terror above a strip of duct tape. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, Vincent could make out two smaller figures. "They're unharmed," Morrison said calmly. "For now. Ms. Rodriguez put up quite a fight when my associates arrived. Impressive woman. She managed to get the children into the bathroom and barricade the door before we convinced her to cooperate." Vincent's hands shook as he stared at the screen. Maria's nurse's uniform was torn, and there was a bruise forming on her cheek. The boys weren't visible enough to see if they were hurt, but Vincent could imagine their terror, their confusion. Diego still had nightmares about the car accident that killed their father. What would this do to them? "You bastard," Vincent whispered. "They're children." "Children have a remarkable capacity for recovery," Morrison replied, tucking the phone away. "Assuming they're given the chance. Now, shall we discuss your cooperation?" Vincent closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every choice that had led him to this moment. 50 years ago, he could have spoken up immediately after Bruce's death. He could have gone to the police, the newspapers, anyone who would listen. Instead, he'd taken the studio's hush money and convinced himself that silence was survival. But silence had a cost. Rebecca Martinez's bright smile flashed through his memory, followed by the newspaper headline about the gas leak that killed her and her crew. How many others had died to protect this secret? How many more would die if he continued to stay quiet? "There's something you're not telling me," Vincent said, opening his eyes. "If you just wanted me dead, you would have killed me already. But you need something else. Something only I can give you." Morrison's expression didn't change, but Vincent caught a flicker of something. Uncertainty? Frustration? "The film reel isn't the only evidence, is it?" Vincent continued, his mind racing. "There's something else. Something that connects your father to other crimes, other cover-ups. You're fishing, Mr. Torino." "Am I?" "Because a smart man like your father wouldn't have kept just one insurance policy. He would have documented everything, every payoff, every threat, every body buried to keep Hollywood's elite comfortable." Vincent leaned forward, studying Morrison's face. "And when he died, really died, he left it all to you. But there's a piece missing. Something I have that you need to complete the picture." Morrison's silence was answer enough. Vincent felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. If he was right, if Morrison needed him alive long enough to retrieve whatever evidence was missing, then maybe there was a chance to save Maria and the boys. "The safety deposit box," Vincent said. "You don't just want what's in it. You need to know which box it is, because your father had multiple boxes, didn't he? And you've been searching for the right one for years." Morrison stood abruptly, smoothing his suit with hands that weren't quite steady. "Clever, but not clever enough to save your friends." He walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the street below. "My father was indeed a cautious man, perhaps too cautious. But his insurance policies were always meant to protect the family business, not expose it. Then why do you need my evidence?" Morrison turned back to him, and for the first time, Vincent saw genuine emotion in the man's eyes. Not anger or calculation, but something deeper. Fear. "Because someone else is looking for it too," Morrison said quietly. "Someone who knew my father. Someone who's been very patient, very careful, and very determined to see the truth come out." He paused, watching Vincent's face. "The documentary crew wasn't the first attempt to contact you, Mr. Torino. There have been others over the years. Anonymous tips to journalists, private investigators asking questions, money offered for information about Bruce Lee's death." Vincent's mind reeled. "You're saying someone else has been trying to expose this?" "I'm saying someone else has been orchestrating it, using you as bait to draw out everyone connected to the original cover-up." Morrison's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "And now, they're close to succeeding." The apartment felt charged with electricity, 50 years of secrets crackling in the air between them. Vincent realized with growing horror that he wasn't just a witness to an old crime. He was the key to something much larger, much more dangerous. And somewhere in the darkness, someone was pulling strings they couldn't even see. Vincent stared at Morrison, pieces of a massive puzzle suddenly clicking into place with terrifying clarity. The documentary crew's questions had been too specific, too focused. the timing of their approach, just months after that article about Bruce Lee's legacy appeared in Variety. The way they'd known exactly which buttons to push to get him talking. Rebecca Martinez, Vincent said slowly. She wasn't working for a documentary company, was she? Morrison's silence confirmed what Vincent already knew in his gut. She was working for whoever's been orchestrating this, and you killed her because she got too close to finding what they really wanted. Vincent's voice grew stronger as understanding flooded through him. But that means you don't know who they are either. You're just as much in the dark as I am. Don't mistake desperation for weakness, Mr. Torino. But Vincent was already seeing past Morrison's composed facade, recognizing the signs he'd missed before. The expensive suit that didn't quite fit properly, suggesting recent weight loss from stress. The way Morrison's fingers trembled slightly when he wasn't actively controlling them. The faint sheen of perspiration on his forehead despite the apartment's chill. This wasn't the composed mastermind Vincent had assumed. This was a man running scared. How long have they been hunting you? Vincent asked. How many of your father's associates have they already found? Morrison's jaw tightened. Long enough. Vincent's mind raced back through the years, remembering fragments that had seemed unimportant at the time. The newspaper clipping about a studio executive's suicide in 1982. The mysterious car accident that killed a makeup artist in 1995. The house fire that claimed a grip supervisor and his wife in 2003. All people who had been on Stage 7 the day Bruce Lee died. They've been eliminating witnesses for decades, Vincent whispered, working their way down the list, making it look like accidents, suicides, natural causes. And now there's only a few of us left, which is why you're going to give me what I need to stop them, Morrison said. But his voice lacked conviction now, the authority draining out of it like air from a punctured tire. Vincent stood slowly, his old knees protesting but his mind clearer than it had been in years. No. You're going to tell me who they are, because whoever's been orchestrating this, they're not trying to expose the truth about Bruce Lee, they're trying to control it. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Think about it, Morrison. If they really wanted justice for Bruce, they would have gone public years ago. Instead, they've been systematically eliminating everyone who knows what really happened. That's not justice, that's consolidation of power. Vincent walked to his kitchen counter, where a bottle of whiskey sat next to a stack of unpaid bills. His hands were steady as he poured 2 glasses, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. He offered one to Morrison, who stared at it as if it might be poisoned. Here's what I think happened, Vincent continued, taking a sip of whiskey. Your father wasn't just studio security. He was muscle for someone bigger. Someone who had Bruce Lee killed for reasons we don't even know yet. And when the heat got too intense, they cut your father loose, faked his death, and let him disappear with whatever evidence he'd collected as insurance. Morrison remained silent, but Vincent saw the truth in his eyes. But your father made a mistake. He raised a son who was smart enough to put the pieces together but not smart enough to stay hidden. And now whoever really killed Bruce Lee has decided it's time to clean house permanently. Starting with the witnesses, then moving on to the sons of witnesses. Shut up, Morrison said, but his voice was hollow. Vincent felt something shift inside him, not quite hope, but something close to it. For 50 years he'd carried the weight of those 6 words Bruce had whispered. The water, they know, save yourself. He'd assumed Bruce was confessing to knowing he was dying, but what if he'd been warning Vincent about something else entirely? What if Bruce had known about the real conspiracy? The one that went far beyond a single murder. That's why you need my evidence, Vincent said. Not to destroy it, but to use it as leverage against whoever's really pulling the strings. Because they have something on you too, don't they? Something that keeps you hunting for answers instead of running. Morrison's composure finally cracked. They have my daughter, he whispered. Took her 3 days ago. Said they'd let her go if I brought them everything. Your evidence, my father's records, all of it. The admission hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Vincent saw Morrison clearly now, not a monster, but another victim, another man trying to protect someone he loved from a machine that had been grinding up lives for half a century. Then we have a problem, Vincent said quietly, because I think they've been lying to both of us. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Morrison slumped into Vincent's threadbare armchair, the expensive suit now looking like a costume that no longer fit its wearer. For the first time, Vincent saw the man clearly, not the composed predator who had invaded his apartment, but a father desperate to save his child, just as lost and manipulated as everyone else in this 50-year game of shadows. "Tell me about your daughter," Vincent said, refilling both glasses. Morrison's hands shook as he reached for the whiskey. "Sarah, 23, graduate student at UCLA, studying film history." His voice cracked on the last words. She was researching Bruce Lee's unfinished movies for her thesis when they took her. The irony isn't lost on me. Vincent settled onto the couch, feeling the familiar ache in his bones that came with sitting too long in one position. But this conversation couldn't wait for comfort. "When did they first contact you?" 3 months ago. Anonymous calls at first, then emails with photographs of Sarah on campus, at her apartment, at the coffee shop where she worked. Morrison drained his glass in one burning gulp. They knew everything about my father's work, details that were never written down, never documented anywhere, which means they were there too, part of the original conspiracy, or close enough to know who was. Morrison set the empty glass on the coffee table with trembling fingers. "They told me my father had stolen something that belonged to them, documents that could destroy powerful people if they ever surfaced." Vincent thought about the safety deposit box, about the items he'd hidden away for 5 decades, never knowing their true significance. "What kind of documents?" Morrison looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Contracts, financial records, evidence that Bruce Lee's death was just the beginning, not the end. My father wasn't just cleaning up one murder. He was covering up an entire network." The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in with the weight of revelation. Vincent had spent 50 years thinking he was protecting himself from the consequences of one terrible day. Instead, he'd been sitting on evidence of something far more sinister. How many others were involved? Studio heads, politicians, crime families from both coasts. Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. Bruce Lee wasn't killed because of a movie or a fight or drugs. He was killed because he'd stumbled onto something he shouldn't have seen. Something about how certain films were being financed, how money was being moved, how certain people were being eliminated when they became inconvenient. Vincent's mind reeled, connections forming and dissolving like smoke. The whispered warnings from crew members over the years, the way certain projects got greenlit despite having no commercial appeal, the mysterious deaths that had seemed unconnected until now. Your father documented all of it. Everything. Names, dates, bank records, photographs. He thought it would keep him alive, give him leverage. Morrison laughed bitterly. Instead, it made him the most dangerous man in Hollywood. Vincent stood and walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the street below. The night seemed different now, every shadow potentially hiding watchers, every parked car a possible threat. Maria and the boys were somewhere out there in the darkness, prisoners in a war they didn't even know they were fighting. "The people who have your daughter and my friends," Vincent said without turning around. "They're not just trying to recover your father's evidence. They're trying to make sure we all disappear before anyone else comes looking." "The documentary was never real," Morrison agreed. "Rebecca Martinez was working for them, yes, but not willingly. They had leverage on her too. Her sister's medical bills, her mother's immigration status. Everyone's a puppet when you pull the right strings." Vincent turned back to face him, decision crystallizing in his mind like ice forming on water. "Then we stop being puppets." Morrison looked up sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we give them what they want." Vincent walked to the kitchen and pulled out his old phone book, fingers finding a number he hadn't called in 15 years. "But not the way they expect. Torino, you can't—" "24 hours," Vincent interrupted, dialing the number. "That's how long we have before they realize we're not going to cooperate quietly. 24 hours to turn the tables." The phone rang once, twice, then a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Kowalski." "Jimmy, it's Vincent Torino. Remember that favor you said you owed me from the Bullet Chute?" Vincent met Morrison's stunned gaze across the small apartment. "I'm calling it in." As Vincent began to explain what he needed, Morrison slowly straightened in his chair. The broken father was still there, but something else was emerging. The son of a man who had survived in Hollywood's darkest corners, who understood that sometimes the only way to win an impossible game was to change the rules entirely. Outside, the city hummed with its usual indifferent energy, unaware that somewhere in its sprawling maze of dreams and disappointments, two old men were preparing to resurrect ghosts that had been buried for half a century. Jimmy Kowalski arrived at Vincent's apartment 3 hours later, moving with the careful economy of a man who had spent 40 years in Hollywood's machinery and understood that some favors came with blood attached. He was thinner than Vincent remembered, his hair completely white now, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him the most trusted script supervisor in the business. "You look like hell, Vinny," Jimmy said, embracing his old friend. "And you sound worse on the phone. What kind of trouble are we talking about?" Vincent introduced Morrison, watching Jimmy's expression shift from curiosity to grim understanding as the story unfolded. When Vincent finished, Jimmy sat quietly for a long moment, fingers drumming against his knee in the same rhythm Vincent remembered from long-ago sets when Jimmy was working through a particularly complex scene. "The Paramount Vault," Jimmy said finally. "That's where you stashed everything. Safety deposit box 247, the keys hidden behind my bathroom mirror." Vincent met Jimmy's eyes. "But that's not what we need from you." "I know what you need." Jimmy pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "You need access to the old screening room at Warner Brothers, the one with the independent projection equipment." He paused, studying Morrison's pale face. "And you need someone who can broadcast a signal that can't be traced back to you." Morrison leaned forward. "What are you planning?" Vincent walked to his closet and pulled out a battered leather jacket, the same one he'd worn on countless sets when his body was younger, but his conscience was more pliable. "We're going to hold a premiere, a very exclusive screening of footage that's been locked away for 50 years. You have film of that day?" Bruce always insisted on multiple cameras for fight scenes, different angles, different speeds. Vincent's voice grew distant, remembering. "The studio claimed they destroyed everything after he died, but I managed to save one reel. The master shot from camera 3. Jimmy whistled low. "The one that shows everything. Everything. Including the moment Bruce whispered those 6 words that made the crew freeze." Vincent turned to Morrison, seeing understanding dawn in the younger man's eyes, and the faces of everyone who was watching when it happened. Morrison stood slowly. "You're talking about evidence that could destroy half of Hollywood. People will kill to keep that footage buried." "People have been killing to keep it buried," Vincent corrected, "for 50 years. Tonight, we stop running and start fighting back." Jimmy was already making calls, speaking in the coded language of film industry professionals arranging equipment, personnel, and favors that would normally take weeks to coordinate. Vincent listened to the familiar rhythm of it, the choreographed dance of logistics that made movie magic possible, now being repurposed for something that might finally bring justice. But as the plans took shape, Vincent felt the weight of what they were attempting settling over him like a lead blanket. Bruce Lee's death had been the first domino in a chain of violence that had claimed dozens of lives over 5 decades. Rebecca Martinez, the documentary crew, all the witnesses who had died in carefully orchestrated accidents, they had all been caught in the gravitational pull of this secret. "There's something else," Morrison said quietly. "Something I haven't told you about my daughter." Vincent's blood chilled at the tone. "What?" "She didn't just stumble onto Bruce Lee's story by accident. Someone guided her to it, fed her research materials, suggested specific archives to examine." Morrison's voice broke slightly. "She called me 2 weeks before she was taken. Said she'd found something incredible, something that would rewrite film history." The apartment fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic and Jimmy's continued phone conversations in the kitchen. Vincent realized they weren't just fighting to save Maria, the boys, and Morrison's daughter. They were fighting to end a cycle of violence that had been feeding on itself for generations, growing stronger with each death, each cover-up, each compromise. "Then we do this right," Vincent said. "We get everyone out alive, and we make sure the truth survives even if we don't." Jimmy returned from the kitchen, his expression grim but determined. Equipment's arranged. The screening room will be ready by midnight. But Vinny, once we start this, there's no going back. These people have been killing to protect this secret for 5 decades. They're not going to stop just because we expose them." Vincent looked around his shabby apartment, at the accumulated debris of a life spent in hiding, at the fear that had shaped every decision for 50 years. Then he thought of Bruce's final words, the warning he'd been too young and too scared to understand. The water, they know. Save yourself. Bruce had been trying to save him. Now it was Vincent's turn to save others. "Then we make sure the truth is loud enough that killing us won't matter," Vincent said, pulling on the leather jacket. "Tonight, we give Bruce Lee the ending his story deserves." 3 weeks after the screening, Vincent sat in the same spot on his coochie, was awakened not by his usual nightmares, but by the steady rhythm of typing from the kitchen table. Morrison, Michael, he'd learned to call him, was working on his laptop, documenting everything they'd uncovered, turning their desperate gamble into something approaching justice. The plan had worked better than any of them had dared hope. The footage from Camera 3, broadcast simultaneously to news outlets, federal investigators, and uploaded to dozens of streaming platforms, had caused exactly the earthquake they'd intended. Within hours, the first arrests were made. Within days, a network of corruption that had metastasized through Hollywood for half a century began to collapse. Maria and the boys had been found safe in a warehouse in San Pedro, shaken but unharmed. Morrison's daughter Sarah was discovered in a similar facility outside of Palm Springs, along with 3 other young researchers who had gotten too close to the truth. The kidnappers, faced with evidence that their decades-long conspiracy was now public knowledge, had simply walked away, leaving their captives behind like discarded props from a canceled production. But Vincent found little satisfaction in their victory. Too many people had died for secrets that, once exposed, seemed almost mundane in their awfulness. Money laundering schemes, political payoffs, the systematic elimination of inconvenient witnesses, the machinery of corruption grinding on year after year, sustained by nothing more than collective fear and willful blindness. "You know what Bruce really said that day?" Vincent asked, breaking the silence. Michael looked up from his laptop. "You never told anyone the actual words." Vincent closed his eyes, remembering Bruce's face in those final moments on set, the way the light had seemed to dim in his eyes even before he collapsed. "The water runs deep, Vincent. They know everything. Save yourself while you can." He knew they were going to kill him. He knew, but he was too proud to run. Vincent opened his eyes, staring at the water stain on his ceiling that had been there so long it felt like part of the architecture. He thought he could fight them head on, expose them through his movies, his platform. He didn't understand that they'd already decided he was too dangerous to live. Michael saved his work and closed the laptop. "Sarah wants to meet you when she's ready." "I'd like that." Vincent meant it. The girl had inherited her grandfather's courage and her father's intelligence, but without the burden of their fear. She represented something new, a generation that might finally be free of the shadows that had shaped too many lives for too long. Jimmy had gone back to his retirement in Burbank, carrying with him the satisfaction of having used his connections for something that mattered. He called every few days, usually with news of another arrest or another piece of evidence surfacing from archives that had been sealed for decades. The investigation was expanding beyond Hollywood now, reaching into political circles, financial institutions, organized crime families that had treated the entertainment industry as their personal money laundering operation. Vincent's small apartment had become an unlikely headquarters for the aftermath. Federal agents came and went, conducting interviews, collecting statements, piecing together timelines that stretched back to the 1970s. Reporters called constantly, wanting exclusive access to the man who had finally spoken Bruce Lee's last words aloud. Vincent turned them all away. He had given his testimony where it mattered, in courtrooms and FBI field offices, places where truth carried legal weight. The nightmares had stopped, replaced by something stranger. Dreams where he was young again, back on that soundstage. But this time when Bruce whispered his warning, Vincent listened. In these dreams he made different choices, found the courage to speak up sooner, saved lives that were lost to 50 years of silence. He knew they were only dreams, but they felt like forgiveness. Maria had returned to her own apartment with the boys. but she visited regularly, bringing groceries and news from the outside world. The city looked the same from Vincent's window, but he knew it had changed in ways that would take years to fully understand. Power structures built over decades were crumbling, replaced by uncertainty but also possibility. "Do you regret it?" Michael asked. "All those years of hiding?" Vincent considered the question, watching afternoon light filter through his blinds in familiar patterns. "I regret the fear. I regret letting Bruce's death become just another Hollywood ghost story. But the hiding?" He shook his head. "The hiding kept me alive long enough to finally tell the truth. Sometimes that's all you can do. Survive until you're strong enough to fight back." Michael nodded and reopened his laptop. There was still work to do, more testimony to give, more questions to answer. But for the first time in 5 decades, Vincent felt like he was living in the present instead of hiding from the past. Outside, Los Angeles hummed with its eternal promise of reinvention. Dreams rising and falling like morning fog, most of them destined for disappointment, but some, just enough, carrying the possibility of something real. Bruce Lee's story finally had its ending, and Vincent Sly Torino had lived long enough to help write it.